You got all those books, the Bible, the different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with. Half the time, they didn't even need to read the subtitles. They could look at it and know what was going on.
For more than 20 years, Mel Gibson has been trying to return to the moment after the stone moved. But his new story does not begin at the empty tomb. It reaches backward, past the crucifixion, past the birth of Christ, and into the fall of the angels. That strange choice leads toward an ancient collection of scripture preserved in Ethiopia, where the Bible contains books most Western Christians never see. Inside those pages are visions of forbidden knowledge, powerful rulers losing control, and a hidden Son of Man appearing when the world believes it still has time. Most people expect the return of Jesus to begin with a trumpet, a darkened sky, or a figure coming through the clouds. These texts suggest the warning may begin much earlier, while life still looks normal. So why is Gibson telling the resurrection through angels, the underworld, and the final battle between light and darkness? And what did Ethiopia preserve that makes the return feel frighteningly close? If you want more ancient prophecies and the hidden history behind them, subscribe to the channel. Because the first clue is not found in the Book of Revelation. It begins with the film Gibson Refused to Leave Behind. In 2004, audiences watched Roman soldiers raise a cross over Jerusalem in The Passion of the Christ. The film ended with a brief image of Jesus alive again. For most directors, that final image would have been enough. For Gibson, it became an open door. He spent the following years talking about a sequel, but he did not describe a simple retelling of the women finding an empty tomb. He spoke about a much larger journey, different times, unseen worlds, the fall of angels, the realm of the dead, and the spiritual forces behind the event. At one point, he called the script an acid trip. How do you place on a screen something the Gospels describe only in flashes? By 2026, filming on the resurrection of the Christ had finally wrapped after 134 days across Italy. The project had become 2 films. Jaakko Ootinen would play Jesus, and Gibson said this was a mission he had carried for more than 20 years. Part 1 was set for May 6, 2027, with Part 2 scheduled for May 25, 2028. Those dates matter because both fall on Ascension Day, the Christian celebration of Jesus rising into heaven before the eyes of his followers. Yet the most revealing detail is not the release plan. It is where Gibson says the story must begin. He wants to begin with the fall of the angels. That event is barely explained in the Bibles most people own. Genesis gives a few mysterious lines. Jude gives another clue. Revelation shows a war in heaven. Then the door appears to close. But in the Ethiopian Christian tradition, that door never closed. One ancient book walks directly through it, names the rebellion, describes the forbidden gifts brought to humanity, and connects that first judgment to the judgment still to come. That book is First Enoch, and once it enters the story, Gibson's strange opening no longer feels strange at all. When people hear the Ethiopian Bible, they sometimes imagine one secret Bible locked inside a mountain church. The truth is more powerful. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church preserves a living Christian tradition with an 81-book canon, 46 books in the Old Testament collection, and 35 in the New. It includes familiar books such as Genesis, Isaiah, Matthew, and Revelation, but also works that disappeared from most Western Bibles. Among them are Jubilees, First Enoch, and other writings carried for centuries in Ge'ez, Ethiopia's classical church language. These were not dug out of the ground in 2026. Ethiopian Christians have read, copied, prayed over, and protected them across generations. Ethiopia's connection to Christianity is ancient. The Kingdom of Aksum embraced the faith in the 4th century. The Garima Gospels, preserved in northern Ethiopia, have been dated to roughly the late 5th through early 7th centuries. They are among the earliest surviving illustrated Christian manuscripts. That matters because the title Lost Book can be misleading. First Enoch was lost mainly to the west. It was not lost in Ethiopia. For centuries, European readers knew that the New Testament letter of Jude mentioned Enoch, but the fuller work seemed to have vanished. Then, in 1773, Scottish traveller James Bruce brought complete Ge'ez manuscripts of Enoch back to Europe. A voice that Western scholars thought was gone had been speaking in Ethiopian churches all along, and the voice did not speak softly. It described angels abandoning their proper place. It described knowledge reaching humanity before humanity was ready to carry it. It described violence filling the earth. Then it looked beyond that ancient disaster toward a future figure called the Chosen One, the Righteous One, and the Son of Man. That is where the mystery changes. The Ethiopian Bible does not simply add more pages before Revelation. It preserves a bridge between the first rebellion and the final return, a bridge that passes through the very themes Gibson says his new films will explore. But to see why the return may be nearer than expected, we first have to see what those angels did. The first rebellion was not only in heaven. Most people know the short version: Satan rebelled, angels fell, evil entered the world. But First Enoch gives a more detailed and frightening sequence. A group of heavenly beings called the Watchers looked down upon human women. They made an agreement, descended to earth, took wives, and broke the boundary between heaven and humanity. Their children became violent giants. Hunger grew, blood covered the land. Yet the giants were only one part of the damage. The Watchers taught human beings things they were never meant to receive in that way. The text speaks of weapons, metalworking for war, enchantments, signs of the heavens, and arts that increase power without increasing wisdom. Knowledge itself is not presented as evil. The danger is knowledge separated from obedience, ability growing faster than character. That old pattern is easy to recognize. Fire can warm a home or burn a village. A machine can copy a voice, create a face, or track a population. The question behind them feels ancient. What happens when human reach grows faster than human restraint? In Enoch, the answer is not immediate thunder from heaven. At first, the world continues. Skills spread. Powerful people gain more power. Violence becomes normal. The boundary has already been crossed, but daily life goes on as if nothing final has happened. Then, the cries of the earth rise upward. The archangels see blood being poured out. The rebellion is exposed. Judgment is ordered. The Watchers who promised freedom discover that they cannot escape the authority above them. Their power had a limit, and they learned it only when the limit closed around them. This is the first major clue behind Sooner Than We Thought. In this ancient pattern, judgment does not begin when the sky finally breaks open. It begins when corruption reaches a point that heaven has already answered, even if people below have not yet seen the answer. Gibson's decision to start with fallen angels may therefore be more than spectacle. It places the resurrection inside a war that began before Bethlehem and ends after the empty tomb. But Enoch's most important figure is not a watcher. It is the one waiting to judge them. In the visions often called the Book of Parables, Enoch sees a figure whose identity is surrounded by light and secrecy. He is called the Son of Man. He stands beside the Ancient of Days. He is linked with righteousness, judgment, and the defeat of kings who believed their power could protect them. For Christian ears, the title is impossible to miss. Jesus repeatedly called himself the Son of Man. The phrase reaches back to Daniel 7, where one like a son of man comes with the clouds and receives a kingdom that will not pass away. Enoch develops the image further. The chosen figure is concealed, then revealed at the appointed moment. The world the mighty controlled suddenly no longer belongs to them. This is not a soft entrance. In 1 Enoch 46, the Son of Man is associated with removing kings from their seats. In 1 Enoch 48, his name is described as chosen before the Lord, and he becomes a light to the nations. In 1 Enoch 62, rulers face him and understand too late whom they rejected. The reversal is complete. Those who appeared untouchable are afraid, while the righteous who appeared forgotten are lifted up. Now place that beside the familiar words of Jesus in Matthew 24. After deception, conflict, persecution, and signs in the heavens, the Son of Man appears on the clouds with power and glory. Angels gather the chosen. The hidden king becomes visible. The connection does not hand us a date. it does something more disturbing. It gives the final scene a longer shadow. The return is not presented as an isolated visitor arriving without warning. It is the public unveiling of a ruler already chosen, already watching, and already moving history toward judgment. Humanity may not recognize the process because the central figure remains hidden until the appointed time. That hidden period is where speculation begins. If the Son of Man is revealed only at the end, what happens before the revealing? What signs are visible while people still laugh, trade, build, marry, argue, and make plans for another 50 years? The answer leads back to passages almost everyone knows, but may have been reading from the wrong end. Wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, false messiahs, persecution, a darkened sun, a moon that no longer gives its light. These are the signs people remember from Matthew 24. Add the seals, trumpets, beasts, and burning images of Revelation, and the return of Jesus can feel like an event nobody could possibly miss. But Jesus places a warning inside the warning. When conflict and disaster begin, he says the end is not yet. He calls the early troubles the beginning of birth pains. Birth pains do not begin at the moment of birth. They announce that a process has entered a new stage. At first, the gaps can be long. Then the pressure builds. The moments come closer together. The final event may still be unseen, but the movement toward it is no longer theoretical. That changes the question. People usually ask, has the final sign happened? Enoch pushes us to ask, has the old pattern started repeating? Are boundaries being crossed? Is power growing without wisdom? Are violence, deception, and spiritual confusion becoming ordinary? Are rulers treating human life as material to be managed? Is knowledge that promises freedom quietly building systems no one can escape? No single war proves the end. Disease, cruel rulers, and frightening inventions have appeared in many centuries. One headline cannot solve the mystery. Yet Jesus does not tell his followers to ignore patterns. He tells them to watch. That is why the Ethiopian material is so effective. It does not replace Matthew or Revelation. It changes the background behind them. In the Watcher's story, society does not suddenly become evil on the final morning. It slowly accepts gifts that increase desire, control, vanity, and violence. The Last Judgment arrives after a long hidden preparation, and in the visions of the Son of Man, the rulers do not fear him until he is revealed. Before that moment, they still believe the world belongs to them. We are now standing between those two images, a process that can begin quietly, and a king who stays hidden until the last possible moment. In the middle of this investigation, subscribe if you want us to keep opening the ancient books behind the stories everyone thinks they already know, because the next clue explains why sooner may have nothing to do with a date on a calendar. Some people immediately turn to the Ethiopian calendar, which runs roughly 7 to 8 years behind the Gregorian calendar. Others count generations, or combine the 6 days of creation with the line in 2 Peter saying that one day with the Lord is like 1,000 years. Dates are circled. A final countdown is announced. Then the date passes. The Ethiopian Bible does not solve that problem with a secret year. Its different calendar is a human system for marking time, not a hidden clock that moves the second coming forward. And Jesus gives a direct limit in Matthew 24:36. No one knows the day or the hour. So how can the return be sooner? Because sooner can describe the beginning of the chain, not the final second. Imagine a house with fire moving inside the walls. The flames have not reached the room. Everyone at the table still sees a normal evening, but the emergency has already begun. The family thinks danger starts with the smoke. It started earlier, beyond their sight. The Watcher's story works in a similar way. Judgment becomes certain before the people living below understand that heaven has responded. The Son of Man remains hidden, but his hiddenness is not absence. The final unveiling comes later. This is the frightening possibility at the center of the title. Humanity may be waiting for the sky to split before admitting that the sequence has started. The ancient Ethiopian material asks whether the moral and spiritual conditions come first, whether the return feels sudden only because the world ignored everything that prepared it. That idea fits another warning from Jesus. He compares the final days to the days of Noah. People eat, drink, marry, and continue normal plans until the flood arrives. Their mistake is not that they failed to read a date. Their mistake is that normal life convinced them nothing could change. Enoch adds the missing darkness behind Noah's world, and that brings Gibson's film back into view. The public knows the basic resurrection story. Jesus is crucified on Friday. His body is placed inside a tomb. On the third day, the stone is moved. Women arrive. The tomb is empty. The disciples first doubt, then see him alive. Later, they watch him ascend. That story could fit inside one film. Gibson made two. He has described a narrative reaching into Sheol, other realms, multiple times, the origin of evil, and the fall of angels. He developed the script with Randall Wallace and his brother Donald Gibson. The new production is therefore not simply asking what happened outside the tomb. It is asking what the resurrection changed across every level of creation. No public production statement says that First Enoch is Gibson's direct source, but the overlap is difficult to ignore. The moment he begins with rebellious angels, hidden realms, and a conflict stretching from the first fall toward final victory, he enters territory Ethiopia preserved in extraordinary detail. Think of what that allows him to show. The cross can become more than a Roman execution. The empty tomb can become more than one man returning to life. The resurrection can be presented as an invasion of death's own kingdom, the turning point in a war that the Watchers, the Accuser, the rulers of darkness, and the powers behind human empires believed they were winning. Then the ascension becomes more than a goodbye. In Acts 1, Jesus rises as the disciples watch. Two figures tell them that he will return in the same way they saw him go. The story creates a straight line: resurrection, ascension, return. Gibson has placed both of his release dates on Ascension Day. Whether chosen for faith, symbolism, or marketing, the effect is clear. Viewers will be invited to watch Jesus rise while remembering the promise that he comes back. And the Ethiopian vision makes that return darker for those who hold power. The hidden Son of Man does not return merely to comfort. He exposes, he removes, he judges. He ends the illusion that wealth, armies, titles, and secret knowledge can make a person untouchable. But what kind of world would make that judgment feel necessary? The next clue is where ancient language begins to sound almost modern. The most dangerous part of the Watcher's story is not that angels came down. It is that humanity liked what they brought. Weapons made domination easier. Secret arts promised control. Knowledge of signs promised access to what was hidden. Beauty could be turned into manipulation. Power entered ordinary life as a useful gift, and the cost appeared later. Today, the world The world lives inside a similar tension. We can speak across oceans in seconds. We can edit genes, build machines that imitate thought, watch cities from orbit, and collect the movements of millions of people. These abilities can heal, protect, educate, and connect. They can also deceive, select, monitor, and destroy at a scale earlier generations could barely imagine. Enoch never says artificial intelligence. Revelation never says microchip. Any person who pretends those exact words are secretly written. There is giving certainty the texts do not give. But speculation becomes reasonable when we compare patterns. What if the final danger is not one invention, but the joining of knowledge, pride, and control? What if the system people fear in Revelation 13 does not appear fully built in one night? What if generations create its tools for convenience and safety, only discovering later that the same tools can decide who may buy, sell, speak, travel, or disappear? This is not a claim that one present company, device, or leader fulfills the prophecy. It is a question about readiness. For the first time in history, parts of the world possess technology capable of enforcing control across enormous populations almost instantly. The ancient warning about power without wisdom therefore lands differently now. And there is another modern echo. The Watchers cross a boundary between kinds of beings. Their rebellion changes bodies, families, and the natural order. Our age is learning how to rewrite living systems. Much of that work may cure disease. But the moral question remains: just because a boundary can be crossed, who decides whether it should be? The terrifying part is how ordinary each step can feel. No trumpet is required. No beast needs to walk into a television studio. People can enter the system willingly because it promises an easier life. That is how Sooner Than We Thought begins to take shape. Not as a date, but as infrastructure. Not as a headline, but as preparation. Yet Enoch saves its strongest warning for the people who believe they will control that future. In the visions of First Enoch, kings and mighty rulers are confident until the Son of Man is revealed. Then, their confidence collapses. The things that separated them from ordinary people, gold, land, soldiers, influence, cannot separate them from judgment. This reversal also drives revelation. Babylon appears rich, secure, and desired by the rulers and merchants of the earth. Then it falls with shocking speed. In Revelation 19, Christ appears as a rider called Faithful and True. The powers gathered against him discover that the battle was never equal. The familiar image is dramatic. Heaven opens, armies follow, and the King of Kings is seen. But Enoch makes the moment personal. Rulers recognize the Chosen One only after the time for controlling the story has ended. Why did they miss him? Perhaps because power creates its own version of reality. A ruler surrounded by agreement can mistake silence for approval. A wealthy system can mistake profit for innocence. A culture that can hide suffering behind screens can believe the cries never rise beyond the earth. The Watchers made the same error. They mistook distance from heaven for freedom from heaven. They acted as if no record existed. Then, the judgment already spoken reached them. This is where Gibson's long project may become more than a Bible film. If his resurrection story moves from the fall of angels through the realm of death and toward the final victory of Christ, audiences will not simply see Jesus leave a tomb. They will see every false throne placed on borrowed time. And borrowed time can feel endless, right until it ends. Still, one warning must remain. Matthew 24 does not give viewers permission to turn fear into a schedule. Jesus warns against false messiahs and deceptive voices. Every generation has produced people who promised they had cracked the code. Some sold books, some gathered followers, some ruined lives. The hour remained hidden. The Ethiopian material should not be used to create another false date. Its force lies somewhere else. It asks whether we are spiritually awake before a date can matter. So the final question is not, can we calculate the return? It is, would we recognize the beginning if it arrived without the sky changing? Now the pieces can be placed together. Mel Gibson returns to the story that made the world stare at the cross. But instead of opening only at the tomb, he reaches back to the fall of angels. The Ethiopian Bible preserves First Enoch, the book that gives that fall its most complete ancient Christian setting. Enoch describes forbidden knowledge, broken boundaries, growing violence, and a judgment decided before the world below understands what is happening. Then it reveals the Son of Man, chosen, hidden, and finally shown to kings who realize too late that their authority was temporary. The Gospels carry the same line forward. Jesus uses that title for himself. He warns of birth pains before the end. He compares the final days to Noah's world, where normal routines continue until sudden judgment arrives. Acts promises that the one who ascended will return. Revelation shows the hidden king becoming impossible to ignore. None of these pages gives us permission to name a day in 2027, 2028, or any other year. The Ethiopian calendar does not unlock it. A war, eclipse, earthquake, new machine, or frightening leader cannot prove it alone. But the absence of a date is not the absence of a warning. The deeper possibility is that we have misunderstood when the return story begins. We imagine it starts when a trumpet sounds. Enoch suggests the conflict may become active while corrupt knowledge spreads, boundaries fall, and powerful people believe there is no authority above them. Jesus says the birth pains come before the arrival. Revelation shows a system rising before the world understands what it accepted. That would make the return sooner than we thought in a very specific sense, not because someone found a secret number in an Ethiopian manuscript, but because the opening movements may happen before the visible event, perhaps across years, perhaps across generations, perhaps inside choices that look harmless at the time. And this is why Gibson's focus matters. A film that begins with fallen angels and moves through the resurrection forces one enormous question. What if Easter morning was not the ending of the Passion, but the beginning of the final defeat of every power that rebelled against God? If that is the story, the Ascension is not a departure into silence. It is an unfinished promise. The hidden king leaves with the warning that he will return. History continues, but it continues between victory already declared and judgment not yet revealed. For more ancient prophecies, lost books, and the hidden human history behind them, subscribe before you leave. Because perhaps the Ethiopian Bible does not reveal the day Jesus will return. Perhaps it reveals something more terrifying. By the time the world finally looks up, the return may already have begun.